The one piece you stopped wearing because someone called it old-fashioned might be the most valuable thing in your jewelry box right now. Not the flashy one, not the big stone. The quiet one you shoved to the back and forgot about sometime around 1994. 11 everyday jewelry pieces have sold for hundreds, some for thousands, and one of them is so common it has probably been sitting in your drawer for decades without a single person telling you what it is actually worth. Tonight we find out if that piece is yours. Here is the truth: nobody at an estate table will ever volunteer. Value in jewelry has almost nothing to do with how a piece looks. It comes down to who made it, when they made it, and whether the proof of both is still stamped on the back. That is the whole game. I have watched dealers sit across a table, look at a tray, know exactly what was in it, and say nothing except a soft number that made it easy to walk away. That is not dishonesty. That is just information living on one side of the table instead of yours. Tonight it moves. The pieces climbing in value right now are not climbing because they got prettier. They are climbing because the people who made them are gone and the tools they used are gone with them. Fixed supply, growing demand. 11 pieces, one test each. Let us start. The Victorian mourning brooch. It is the ugly one. Go ahead and admit it. The black oval pin sitting at the bottom of the jewelry box like a little piece of bad news. Heavy, dark, decorated with a weeping willow or a tiny urn. And if you are really lucky, a small window on the back with a lock of someone's hair sealed inside it. Most families look at this and think two things: one, gross, and two, worthless. Both of those instincts are going to cost you money. Victorian mourning jewelry was made between roughly 1830 and 1900, and the best of it was not cheap even then. It was commissioned. The jet, the true Whitby jet, is a form of fossilized wood found only along a specific stretch of the Yorkshire coast in England, and the veins that produced the finest pieces ran thin and ran out. What replaced it was French jet, which is just black glass, and vulcanite, which is an early rubber compound. Three materials that look nearly identical to an untrained eye and sit in three very different price brackets. Here's your test, and it is a simple one. Pick the piece up and press it against the inside of your wrist for about 10 seconds. True Whitby jet warms almost immediately because it is organic material. Glass stays cold. Vulcanite sits somewhere in between and also carries a faint smell like rubber if you rub it firmly. Warm quickly and you're holding something real. Then turn it over. Look for a cartouche, a small stamped oval or rectangle with a maker's name or the word Whitby pressed into the metal backing. A documented Whitby jet mourning brooch in good condition has sold at auction for over $400. A signed set has reached well above that. The hair inside, by the way, is not what creeps people out once they find out what the piece is worth. Funny how that works. Signed, costume brooch. Eisenberg, Weiss, Kramer. Your mother wore one of these to church on Easter Sunday for 30 years and called it her nice pin. It looks like a rhinestone brooch. It photographs like a rhinestone brooch. At a yard sale, it prices like a rhinestone brooch, which is to say $2 in a Ziploc bag on a card table. And if nobody reads the back, it sells like that too, which is exactly the tragedy I am here to help you avoid. Here is what the card table never told you. In the 1940s, when the fashion houses could not get platinum or real stones because everything was going to the war effort, the great American costume houses stepped into the gap and hired real designers, trained jewelers, people who had worked in the fine trade and brought those skills to glass and rhodium-plated brass. Eisenberg and Sons of Chicago started in the clothing business, put rhinestone clips on their garments to keep them from being stolen off the display floor, and watched customers steal the clips instead of the coats. That is how you accidentally become a jewelry house. True story. And their pieces reflect that seriousness of intent. An Eisenberg ice brooch, the line they introduced in 1942, has sold for $250 and higher, depending on the complexity of the design. Weiss pieces have crossed 400. A large Kramer parure, the match set of brooch and earrings, has reached 500. Your test tonight costs nothing. Turn the piece over, read the back. Look for the name stamped or etched into the metal. Not printed on a paper tag, actually struck into the metal itself. Eisenberg in script, Weiss in block letters, Kramer of New York with all 4 words. Name on the back is where all the money lives in costume jewelry. A rhinestone brooch with no name is pretty. A rhinestone brooch with the right name is a car payment. The gold-filled pocket watch. It is sitting in a velvet box that smells like the inside of someone's dresser drawer, and nobody has wound it in 20 years. The chain is tangled. The crystal is scratched. And every person who has looked at it has said some version of the same thing. It is probably not real gold, right? Let me stop you there, because that assumption is the single most expensive mistake in American estate jewelry. Here is the distinction that changes the number on the table. Gold-plated means a microscopic layer of gold electroplated over base metal, worth almost nothing beyond scrap. Gold-filled means a thick layer of gold mechanically bonded to a base metal core, required by law to be at least 1/20th of the total weight. The standard marking is 1/20th 12 karat GF or 1/20th 14 karat GF, and it is stamped inside the case back. That ratio sounds small until you do the math on a heavy pocket watch. Gold-filled pieces contain real, measurable, meaningful gold. And a signed gold-filled pocket watch from a respected American maker is worth considerably more than its metal. The houses to know are Waltham, Elgin, and Hamilton. These were not trinket makers. Waltham was supplying the railroads with precision instruments when the railroads were the most demanding accuracy environment in the country. An Elgin grade pocket watch in a gold-filled hunter case sold at auction for over $600. A Hamilton in fine condition has crossed 1,000. Your test. Open the case back and read every word stamped inside it. GF with a fraction in front of it means gold-filled. Then read the movement, the mechanical works inside, for the maker's name and the grade number. Waltham, Elgin, Hamilton, and the grade number beside them is the combination that pays. I have watched these leave estate sales in the bottom of a shoebox for $8. The velvet box they were sitting in was worth more than the buyer paid for everything inside it. The Art Nouveau, enamel pendant, the dragonfly, the woman with the flowing hair and the flowers growing out of it, the peacock with the tail spread in colors that should not be possible in metal. Your family probably kept it because it was pretty but never wore it, because it felt costumey and fussy. They were right that it was remarkable. They were wrong about what that meant for the price. Art Nouveau as a movement ran roughly from 1890 to 1910, and what the jewelers working in that window did with enamel had not been done before and has not been replicated since at any kind of scale. The technique most associated with the finest pieces is plique à jour, a process where enamel is suspended in a metal framework with no backing, the way stained glass holds light so the piece glows when held up. It requires extraordinary patience and an almost criminal level of skill, and it cannot be rushed. René Lalique was the name that sat at the top of this movement, and a signed Lalique piece is a museum conversation. But the unsigned ateliers working in the same tradition are the ones hiding in ordinary jewelry boxes, and they are the ones I want you to check tonight. Your test. Hold the pendant up to a lamp and look at the enamel. If it glows, if light passes through it the way it passes through a stained glass window, you are looking at plique à jour. Then turn it over and study the metalwork for any mark, any cartouche, any hallmark pressed into the frame. A French enamel Art Nouveau pendant with provenance has sold well above $2,000. Even unsigned examples in fine condition with intact enamel have crossed $500. The single biggest value killer in this category is a crack in the enamel, and cracks are easy to miss until you hold the piece to the light and rotate it slowly. Do that before anyone else in that room does. Mexican silver, the Taxco bracelet, the heavy one, the one that pulls on your wrist and leaves a faint green mark if the humidity is wrong and that you stopped wearing sometime in the 1980s because it felt like a costume. It is probably sitting in the bottom of a basket on your dresser right now under a tangle of necklaces you also never wear, and it is probably the most undervalued piece in that basket. Here is the history you were never given. In the 1930s, an American named William Spratling moved to the small Mexican town of Taxco, hired local silversmiths, and began producing silver jewelry that fused pre-Columbian indigenous design with the modernist movement then sweeping the art world. He essentially invented an industry. And the silversmiths he trained others, and those names, Los Castillo, Antonio Pineda, Margot de Taxco, Hector Aguilar, became the signatures that collectors now chase with real money. Your test is the eagle stamp, and it is not optional. Mexican silver sold for export after 1948 is required to carry a small eagle head stamp alongside the silver content mark, usually 925 or 980. That eagle is your authentication. Then look for the maker's mark beside it. A signed Antonio Pineda cuff has sold at auction for over $1,000. Margot de Taxco enamel pieces regularly cross $1,500. Even unsigned early Taxco with a clean eagle stamp brings $200 to $300. The bracelet that pulls on your wrist and goes unworn is not a fashion problem. It is a research project with a potentially excellent return. Go find the eagle. Mid-century modernist studio jewelry. This is the weird one, the abstract one. The brooch that looks like someone bent a handful of silver wire into a shape and called it art. Your family probably kept it because throwing it away felt wrong, but nobody has worn it since the administration of a president who has been dead for decades. Fair enough. It does not look like jewelry in any conventional sense, and that is precisely why it is one of the fastest rising categories in the entire estate jewelry market right now. American studio jewelry emerged in the 1950s as a generation of artists trained on the GI Bill came out of art schools and decided that jewelry was a legitimate sculptural medium. They worked alone or in tiny workshops, signed every piece, and kept their production intentionally small. The names at the top of this world are Art Smith, Sam Kramer, Ed Wiener, Margaret DePata. A single Art Smith cuff sold at Sotheby's for over $10,000. A Sam Kramer piece with its distinctive creature-like forms has crossed $3,000. I will be honest with you, those are the top of the market. Most studio pieces you will find in an estate range from a few hundred to around 2,000. But here is the important thing. Most of them are still being priced at estate sales, like the abstract wire bangle nobody wants, because the people pricing them do not know what they are looking at. Your test. Turn the piece over and look for a signature, sometimes a full name, sometimes initials, sometimes a small stamped mark. Then weigh it in your hand. Studio jewelry tends to be deliberately substantial, made to make a statement. If it is signed and heavy and abstract and clearly handmade, you're holding something a museum curator would recognize. The weird brooch is not the problem piece in the collection. It is the one worth researching before you let it go for $5 in a mixed lot. Now stop for a moment, because there is a thread running through everything we have covered so far, and I want to name it plainly before we get to the top 5. Not one piece on this list looks expensive. Not a single one. The mourning brooch looks grim. The rhinestone pin looks like costume jewelry because it is costume jewelry. The pocket watch looks like a grandfather's forgotten habit. The enamel pendant looks fussy. The silver bracelet leaves a mark on your wrist. The modernist brooch looks like art school homework. Every single one of them has been dismissed, donated, sold for $1, or shoved to the back of a drawer at some point in its life. And every single one of them has also sold for serious money to someone who knew what they were looking at. That gap between what something looks like and what it is worth is not an accident. It is the whole reason the antiques trade functions. And it is a gap you can close. The physical tests, the maker's marks, the hallmarks, the production dates, the condition tells, all of it is learnable. That is the reason I put together a guide called the Appraiser's Playbook, where I walk through the marks and the methods across every major category of estate jewelry, so you can read a piece before someone across the table reads it for you. It is linked below if you want it. Now, let us get to the top 5, and this is where the numbers get serious. Bakelite jewelry, the chunky one. The bangle in a color that does not exist in nature, bright cherry red, or a green that belongs on a cartoon frog, or a creamy butterscotch that your grandmother wore stacked 4 at a time on her left wrist and clacked together when she gestured, which she did constantly because she was that kind of woman. Bakelite was the world's first synthetic plastic, invented in 1907 by a Belgian-American chemist named Leo Baekeland, and between the 1920s and the 1940s it was pressed and carved into jewelry at a scale that makes the volume almost incomprehensible. Most of it sells for $10 to $30. But here is where it gets interesting, and here is why you need to check yours tonight. Carved Bakelite, pieces with deep figural carving, animals, fruits, figures in relief, commands a completely different price. A deeply carved and rare figural Bakelite bangle has sold on the open market for over $800. A match set of carved Bakelite clips in an unusual color has crossed $1,000, and the color itself is a major driver. Apple juice, the clear golden yellow, and the deeply figured carving in unusual colors are what collectors compete for. Here is your test, and I want you to actually do this tonight because it is one of the more satisfying things you will do all week. Take a cotton swab and put a small amount of Simichrome polish or even plain Formula 409 on it. Rub the inside of the piece firmly for about 15 seconds. If the swab turns yellow, you are holding authentic Bakelite. If nothing transfers, you have a later plastic. Warm to the touch and that yellow transfer, that is the combination that tells you to keep researching before you let it go. The clacking bangles your grandmother left behind may be worth more stacked together than anything else in the box. Georgian paste jewelry. This is the one that has been called fake for 200 years. The silver and glass set that sits in the oldest part of the jewelry box and gets described as paste, as in not real, as in imitation. And technically that description is accurate, and it is also completely missing the point in a way that has cost families real money across 2 centuries. Paste jewelry was not made because nobody could afford gemstones. It was made because the gemstones of the day, the real ones, were often left in the safe, and the paste copies were the ones that actually got worn. The techniques used to make the finest Georgian paste, cut in foil-backed glass set in closed-back silver settings, required skills that are genuinely rare today. Each stone was individually cut, placed over a small piece of metallic foil to enhance its reflectivity, and set by hand in silver that was then closed at the back to protect the foil from air and moisture. It catches light in a way that modern stones simply do not replicate. The market has woken up to this. A Georgian foil-back paste Riviere necklace sold at Bonham's for over $3,000. Paste parures in their original fitted cases have crossed $5,000. Your test is the setting itself. Georgian paste is almost always set in silver, not gold, with a closed back. Open back settings mean a later period and a lower price. The foil should be visible if you look at the back of each stone with a loupe, a small metallic shimmer behind the glass, and the piece should feel heavy and deliberate, made with intention, not pressed out by a machine. The glass that was called fake for 2 centuries is turning out to be the thing collectors actually want. Somebody should have told your great-grandmother to stop apologizing for it. Native American pawn jewelry, the turquoise cuff, the heavy squash blossom necklace, the concho belt your family picked up somewhere in the Southwest decades ago and has called a tourist piece ever since. Maybe it is. Probably some of it is. And one piece in that collection might not be, and that one piece is the one I need you to look at tonight. The term old pawn refers specifically to Native American jewelry that was made for personal use and later deposited at a trading post as collateral. These were not made for sale. They were made to be worn, to carry meaning, to function as wearable wealth within a community. And because they were made for those purposes and not for a tourist market, they reflect a level of craftsmanship and material quality that the later commercial pieces rarely match. The silver is heavier, the turquoise is natural, not stabilized or dyed. The stamps are hand-applied with individual tools. Here is how you begin to tell them apart. On the silver, look for hand-stamped designs where you can see the slight irregularity of individual tool strikes, never perfectly even, never mechanically repeated. Turn the piece over and look at the solder points where the silver joins. Old work shows hand soldering with slightly uneven flow. Then look at the turquoise itself under good light. Natural high-grade turquoise has depth, a matrix of darker veining that runs through it unevenly. Stabilized stone looks flat and too consistent. A genuine Navajo old pawn cuff with documented provenance has sold at Cowan's auctions for over $3,000. The squash blossom necklace your family thought was a souvenir might be worth sitting with an expert before it ends up in a donation bag. And I say that having watched it happen more than once, which is something I have not entirely made peace with. The retro gold cocktail ring, 1940s, the enormous one. The yellow gold ring with the big synthetic stone, the one that is objectively too large for anyone's hand, and that every person who has tried it on has laughed a little before putting it back. Your daughters have called it gaudy. They are probably not wrong by modern standards. But gaudy and valuable have always been different conversations. And right now in the estate jewelry market, 1940s retro is one of those conversations with real momentum behind it. The retro period in jewelry runs roughly from 1935 to 1950 and was defined by Hollywood, literally. The big studios were commissioning jewelry for films because platinum was restricted for wartime use, and yellow gold stepped in and went enormous and theatrical, because enormous and theatrical is what reads on a screen. Sweeping scroll work, large synthetic rubies and sapphires in vivid colors, rose gold accents alongside yellow, dramatic scale. It was designed to be looked at from a distance, and it worked. What happened next is what matters to you now. The 1940s, retro pieces were unfashionable for so long that very few people saved them with care. The ones that survived in good condition are genuinely scarce. A large retro yellow gold and synthetic ruby cocktail ring sold at heritage auctions for over $2,000. A signed piece from a house like Trifari or Coro in their fine gold-filled retro line has crossed $1,500. Your test is the scale and the construction. Retro pieces feel substantial. They were not miniaturized. The gold has heft and the scroll work is dimensional, rising off the surface rather than sitting flat. Read the inside of the shank for any maker's mark and have the gold tested, because a piece this size in 14 karat is carrying real metal value before you even begin the conversation about the design. The ring everyone laughed at may be the one that gets the last word, the signed gold-filled locket. And here we are. Number one. And I will tell you right now, before I describe it, that most of you already know exactly which piece I am about to name. You can picture it. It is oval. It is on a chain. It is gold-colored in a way that looks warm and slightly worn. There is probably a photograph inside it of someone whose name you know, but whose face you have never seen outside of that locket. It has lived in your grandmother's jewelry box, or your mother's, or in a small dish on the top of the dresser in the guest room that nobody sleeps in anymore. It is the locket. The gold-filled locket, made from roughly 1880 to 1915, is the single most likely valuable piece already sitting in the average American woman's jewelry collection, and it is consistently the most underestimated. Here is what is working in its favor right now, and has been quietly working for the last several years. Sentimental jewelry is surging. Lockets specifically, the personalized wearable keepsake, are being sought by a generation of younger collectors who want the emotional weight of estate jewelry alongside the history. And the ones that were made by American houses like Lockets Dunn and Collins, or English houses hallmarked at Birmingham and Chester, are rising to meet that demand. Here is the test, and it is the same test every item tonight has been teaching you to run. Turn it over. Read every word on the back of the locket. The fill ratio will be stamped there. 1/20th 12 karat GF or 1/10th 12 karat GF, and the higher that fraction, the more gold is actually in the piece. 1/10th GF is meaningfully more valuable than 1/20th. Then open the locket and look at the inside of the case for any maker's cartouche or hallmark pressed into the interior. Then look at the chain. Does it match? Is it the original chain? A locket and its original chain are worth significantly more together than the locket alone, because original chains are extraordinarily hard to replace correctly. A signed Victorian gold-filled locket in fine condition with its original chain has sold on the estate market for over $800. With exceptional maker's marks and the original photograph still inside, examples have crossed $1,200. I will be honest with you, most lockets are worth $100 to $300, and that is still not nothing for something sitting forgotten in a box. But the ones at the top of that range are there because somebody turned them over. Somebody read the back. Somebody did not accept that a warm gold oval on a chain was just a pretty nothing from a long time ago. The photograph inside, by the way, do not remove it. Do not clean it. Do not try to identify it through any process that requires touching it. The photograph is part of the provenance, and it is part of the story, and the story is part of the price. Every serious collector I have ever spoken to on this subject has said the same thing. A locket with its original photograph is more interesting than a locket without one. And the market agrees. The plainest piece in the box, the one that has been there the longest, the one that carries the most history, is the one we have been working toward all night. Go find it. Turn it over. Read it like it has something to say, because it does. Every single piece tonight had one thing in common. None of them looked expensive. Not one. The ones that sold for thousands looked, to the average eye, like things that belonged in a donation bag. And the ones that went in the donation bag went because nobody turned them over. That is the whole lesson. One habit. Turn it over. The front is the story a piece wants to tell you. The back is the truth. The maker's mark, the hallmark, the fill stamp. Everything worth money tonight lived on the back, and almost nobody looked. So before you clear a single drawer, before you accept the first number a dealer slides across the table, run the test first. If this changed how you see your jewelry box tonight, tap like and subscribe. Tell me in the comments whose piece you're going to check first. I read every single one. Go turn it over.